I look back on it as a young man's wonderful adventure, a lot of it, with some bad and some serious and some dangerous moments. The goal was freedom, but you had to dare to be free.
One of the greatest real-life escape stories of World War II is the tale of a young Kiwi soldier. He carried a terrible injury, but his repeated attempts to escape Nazi camps made him a living legend. Walter Babington Thomas, aka Sandy, CB, DSO, MCN Bar, ED, Silver Star, finished his career as Major General, commanding tens of thousands. But he started as a gutsy lieutenant from Riwaka, itching for adventure, keen to make a name for himself. So young and keen, he had to lie about his age to enlist in the New Zealand Army.
I imagined in my daydreams having an adventure to do with soldiering, but I never dreamt of what fate would bring to me, all free.
As World War II began in 1939, New Zealand rushed to form fighting units to help Mother England. New soldiers signed up from all walks of life, not knowing where they were being sent or what they had to do there. For every young soldier, including Sandy's mates, it was an unforgettable time.
General Kippenberger describes them, most of them, as being half drunk and in a pretty dishevelled-looking lot.
I would think that 90% of our infantry, other than possibly a few of the NCOs and a few of the officers, all came from the country.
South Islanders are all poachers, you might say. Deer shooters, pig shooters, rabbit shooters. They pinch anything they could lay hands on, because it was at the tail end of the Depression.
Just a few months ago, these men were working alongside...
New Zealand's 23rd Battalion, from the South Island, was thrown together. In unseemly haste, the rookie soldiers were off to the front line. Dreaming of adventure and world travel, the 19-year-old farm boy was also going to work for king and country.
There was much more patriotism, I think. I mean, people were very proud of being New Zealanders and also proud of being part of the whole British complex. And so if you joined and put on a uniform, the girls rather thought you were doing something for your country.
Sailing to a war set to change his life forever, Sandy was already in awe of the highly professional German army. On Crete, his war began in earnest. In the middle of the Mediterranean, Crete was a major strategic focus. To capture the island, Germany tried a new style of warfare. A massive bomb drop, then an army by parachute.
When the first parachutes came over, they hadn't realized that we had always hidden under the trees whenever they came over, and they dropped one whole battalion on us. And very few of them got away from it. I mean, it was a wonderful start to the war for us, because it was like duck shooting them coming out of the air. Terrible, really.
Sandy's platoon raced out to attack a group of paratroopers who had landed near their position. In his first firefight, charging up a small hill ahead of the rest of his unit, young Lieutenant Thomas quickly discovered the deadly realities of hand-to-hand combat.
I stopped, and I think I threw a grenade right at the back. Then I jumped up, and immediately I jumped up, I saw a German soldier lying with a revolver in his hand right at my feet. Fool I was, I turned my rifle up down to give him a little tap in the head. And just when I had it in the air, I saw this German coming through the trees. And he was firing, and all the leaves of the olives were falling around my head and everything. And my God, it was something I can see vividly now. He stopped and he really took aim, and he just steadied like this. And suddenly I saw a big red spot in the middle of his forehead. And then Corporal Thompson was at the standing up to here. He just fired the shot and he got the German. And he said, for God's sake, sir, you oughtn't be quite so far ahead of us. And I said, look, from now on I'm going to lead right from the rear, you know.
But he was never at the rear. And as the battle for Crete turned to the small town of Galatos, Sandy once again fought on the front line.
we got into the village and we were having some success, and then I realised that we were also having a lot of casualties, and there were a hell of a lot of Germans in there.
Deep in enemy territory, bayonets fixed and ready to attack, an exploding German bullet changed everything.
We charged across the square and we had them on the run. And at the same time, we saw 3 or 4 Germans suddenly turn around and charge towards us, a nice young fair-haired German. And I had my revolver and I fired at him, but at the same time as I fired, I suddenly felt this tremendous blow in my thigh.
Oh yes, well you knew yourself, there's nothing like abject fear, especially when you're lying on your stomach and you're getting shell hammered at you and machine gun fire going over the top.
A young boy called Schroeder, who later on escaped with me at one time, he was wounded too, but he pushed me into a gutter and applied a tourniquet.
The Germans quickly took the town and Sandy was captured. The bullet had blown a huge hole in his thigh. Barely conscious with immense blood loss, it looked like Sandy's war was over. A German doctor recommended amputating Sandy's left leg. Luckily, Sandy was moved from the battlefield to a POW hospital near Athens.
I still remember now the thought of waking up and thinking, God, I probably lost my leg, and all the implications for a young man. And so I put my hand down and I couldn't feel anything at all. It was all absolutely dead, and lots of bandages and things like that, and on. But even though it was dead, I could feel a leg, and a relief out of this world.
Seriously wounded and imprisoned by the Germans, Sandy Thomas spent the next 4 months in bed. While his body recovered, he had one goal in mind.
To me, it was the only thing to think about, in prison camp, was how to get out.
And of course, the thought at the back of your mind, you didn't intend to be any bloody prisoner of any enemy. So you took to your scrapers.
Sandy took his duty as an officer very seriously. At every possible opportunity, he tried to break out. Cutting through the wire and running didn't work. Hiding in the back of a work truck didn't work. At German HQ, he snatched a cleaner's bucket and mop and simply walked out the front door. That nearly worked. But when a fellow officer died, Sandy's colleagues discovered a real opportunity. A soldier's agreement allowed Allied POWs to bury their fallen comrades privately in a local cemetery. The coffin was draped in a Union Jack and lowered into the grave, while the German guards kept a respectful distance.
And then the Greek monk type of people who ran the cemetery invited us in to have an ouzo, because a wonderful thing, the drink we'd had for a long time, and they opened a bottle of ouzo, and then suddenly we realised we'd left the flag on, they said, don't worry, we'll send it back with the coffin. And it wasn't until later that one of our chaps said, Christ, they use the same coffin for each one.
And if they used the same coffin, that meant the coffin never got buried, which meant that if someone was alive inside the coffin...
and then I died.
Helped by Australian medics, Sandy faked pneumonia and sadly passed away, until a friendly German doctor came to pay his last respects.
I was holding my breath and everything. Then I didn't see it, but I could feel his hand coming down. And I couldn't take it. And I snorted and looked up, and you would see that he was a very portly man. He was so shocked, and then he suddenly roared without it.
This was Sandy's 4th failed attempt in as many months. Disappointed but determined, he realised that as long as he stayed in the same hospital, he was going to stay a prisoner.
All the German sentries knew me, and if I went anywhere near a gate or a vehicle or anything like that, they would drop everything and just watch me, you see, and they like one of their children.
Sandy was soon transferred to a real prison camp at Salonika in northern Greece. Salonika camp was in a different league. Reckless assaults on the wire would not end with a short stretch in solitary.
3 chaps who tried to get away and got caught in the wire, they were shot there and left there for days, as an example. There's no doubt that Salonika had a different atmosphere. It wasn't a hospital, it was a prison camp, and you did not escape.
But that reputation was not going to stop Sandy. he discovered a weakness in the perimeter fence. A single door to the outside world, well barricaded but not so well watched. Beyond the door, a gravel road covered by searchlights, a low stone wall, and then darkness. The streets of downtown Salonika, and freedom. Night after night, he slowly removed the barriers, replacing them loosely before going back to bed in the early hours of the morning. After 3 nights, the door was ready.
When I decided to go, I went over and went down, and an Australian orderly, medical orderly, stood at the top, and he would throw a shoe down whenever the Germans came along the road, and he would whistle some tune when it was all clear, and I would go on removing the last of the bolt.
Sandy was almost out, but he could see one more obstacle, a rather formidable lock on the door.
I thought I'd have to work for hours and perhaps the whole night to get the door open, but it wasn't locked. And I pulled it, and it was only held by some wire on the outside, which I was able to cut really easily in the gaps.
The door opened, revealing the ultimate hurdle, a crunchy gravel road guarded by 2 machine gun towers. Taking his life in his hands, Sandy tried to second-guess the searchlights.
You know, I waited, I was all set to go, oh, thank God I didn't go that time, because both sides seemed to come back. And then next time, a long period, oh, why didn't I go that time? And then suddenly, without any real reason, I went in a period of doubt, and the light started coming back, and so instead of getting over the head, I lay down on the gravel. And I tell you this, if you have your head down, pressed into gravel, you can see light a long way down. Suddenly, one went off, and a little while later, it was darker again, and I nipped over that little fence.
Sandy jumped down into the streets of Salonika. It was 8 months since his capture on Crete.
I stopped and took my socks off my shoes, which I'd put on for noise, and I just felt as though all the cares in the world had been taken off my shoulder, free, and it was a wonderful feeling.
But he was still deep in German-occupied Greece. Sandy must rely heavily on local farmers and villagers who could be shot for helping him. His best plan was to walk 100 kilometres east with a still gaping leg wound to Mount Athos. There he might find a boat to sail through Nazi-controlled waters to reach Turkey.
He only kept one step ahead of the Germans. They seemed to know, everybody seemed to know that the Germans were chasing him up. But how he managed to walk all those miles with such a gaping wound.
But a major leg wound wasn't his only problem. Over 6 feet tall, dressed in parts of a British uniform, boyish and blonde, Sandy looked nothing like a German, and even less like a Greek.
It always amazed me how quickly they knew I was English. And I could never understand it. I mean, I tried to grow a beard, but of course I couldn't. I was too young. So I thought, oh, bugger it. I saw a barber shop, and I went in and sat down and had a shave and had my beard off. I thought, well, if I'm supposed to be English, I might as well look like a bloody good one.
Mount Athos, the holy mountain of Greece, traces its history back to biblical days. The peninsula contains 21 monasteries and 8,000 monks, dedicated to meditation and prayers and the preservation of human life.
No telephone. Everything was on foot. No roads that you could think of. You get to the monasteries by sea or by these mountain tracks.
He did very nearly die on the peninsula, on Mount Athos Peninsula, when he finally got there. He took a very heavy fall when he was going around the coast, and his wound started to hemorrhage.
It's funny enough, they gave me a lot of wool, which they would soak in olive oil, and I'd put it into the wound and then cover that with bandages, and that was good. But you've got to realise that I had no feeling in the leg. It was not as though I was doing something with pain.
On the Holy Mountain, Sandy found other escaped soldiers. The monks' compassion, expertise and patience helped his wound. But hiding escaped prisoners was a very risky business.
If the Germans came around, they would hide you or put you out in the trees for a while, but always find food for you. And a lot of our chaps would have died, I think, without the monastery.
The monks helped Sandy as much as they could, but they couldn't give him a boat. That was something only the local fishermen could provide.
The Greek is wonderful, really. He's generous on the heart. With his hand, he will say, but of course I can help you. We will get you a boat. Not today, but tomorrow or the next day. Abre Mathabre.
Realising the locals were never going to sell him a boat, Sandy decided he would simply have to steal one. 9 months after his capture, he joined forces with 3 other escaped soldiers. Now just 1 step ahead of the Germans and a half step ahead of the local police, the pressure was on.
But right in the middle of this little bay was the most lovely boat, just lying there, just on the edge of the water, with the sail flapping, and even from there we could see the oars lying on the ground by, and we thought, oh crap, is it worth it?
It was a now or never decision.
We just walked along and picked up the oars and threw them in and pushed the boat. It was quite heavy, actually. Pushed it out. The sails were up already, and turned it around, got out in the water, got into the boat, and sails up, and started moving quite steadily out to sea. There's no rowing, nothing. So we thought, we've done it.
Fortune was smiling on the brave and audacious Kiwi. For the moment.
And suddenly, Nicky, he said there's a lot of water in the boat, and Don said, shut up, you little bugger, because just the boat's been in the sun, and it probably, as soon as the water gets going, it'll close up. And it wasn't so, it was soon up our ankle. And then we found this bloody bug. It had this long, about 1 inch wide with a dark mark. And we thought, and I think there was a funny side to this. You see the 3 of us, over the whole of the rather dirty bottom of the boat with all sort of fishy things coming up and floating around, trying to find a hole.
Try as they might, Sandy and his comrades couldn't find a home for the bone. With the water coming in faster than they could bail, they were faced with a difficult decision.
So we thought, oh, bugger, they had to turn around. We turned around and looked and saw, because by this time the Greeks had realised.
The entire village was now standing on the beach, angrily.
In the centre of which was a little man who was doing really the Greek version of the Highland thing. I mean, he was absolutely full of the most wonderful invective. We were no longer British prisoners of war, we were thieves who were stealing people's boats, and boats were people's livelihood in many cases.
With the boat safely back on shore, Sandy and his mates quickly explained their escape plans to the furious crowd.
Almost immediately there was a change of sympathy in the crowd, but not the little man for a moment. He suddenly realised that the sympathy had gone to us, and he swung around and spoke to them and he said, don't you, I'm going to welcome them. It was my boat they stole. Nobody seems to think this in any way illogical.
Suddenly becoming the boat owner's best friends, Sandy's crew were invited to his home to be wined and dined.
We sat around and drank his wine all that night and were filled up with food, in the middle of which he suddenly said, oh, I know where there's a boat for you.
In what now seems to Sandy typical Greek fashion, the fisherman told them about a boat shed. It belonged to his former brother-in-law. It was well fortified, but inside, according to the fisherman, was the perfect boat for an escape to Turkey. One moonlit night, the crew descended on the boat shed with a bunch of barely adequate tools to make good the escape Sandy had been dreaming of for nearly a year. They quickly discovered the only way into the boat shed was through the boat ramp doors.
And we had these saws, these Greek saws, which they cut on the pull rather than the push. And we all went working like mad cutting this bar.
The crossbar finally gave way to their determined, if somewhat blunt, sword. With a few judicious blows of their axe, they were inside.
And the doors opened, and there's this wonderful boat, enormous great thing, you know. The Navy would call it a ship, I think, wasn't it?
Sandy was on his way. Dodging German patrols for 3 days and 3 nights, the crew finally beached on the coast of neutral Turkey. Freedom was very close at hand.
We swung the boat towards the shore, and it went in through the reeds and stuck on the land. Oh, that's an elation. We've made it. We're here. We're free.
But Sandy was still far from safety. Turkish police escorted him onto a train and right across Turkey to the border with Syria.
And he didn't know where he was going, I don't think. He thought he might have been headed for a concentration camp or even back to the Germans.
It was about 3 days on that train, I think. But as the dawn was breaking, I remember we knew we were getting very near the border.
But the train stopped short of the border. A big plane, and the intelligence officer took him up the top of the hill and he said, "Mr. Thomas, you see those blokes down there? They're British."
The entire border was being fortified against a German assault. Thousands of soldiers and many different military units were hard at work.
I crossed that border and went over and found not British soldiers, but New Zealand soldiers, my own 23rd Battalion, my own company, and my brother was with them.
But we didn't see much of Sandy there, only a glimpse in a way. I don't know what happened to him for months after that.
Now, escaped prisoners were generally meant not to take any further part in the battle. And they were also obviously reluctant to take on somebody who may not physically be back at full strength.
Sandy could be disqualified on both counts. Trouble was, he didn't want to go home. In typical fashion, he went straight to the top, to General Freiberg, who was already a big influence in Sandy's career.
He said, "Let me have a look at your wound." And so I had to get on a table thing they had there, and Jack undid all the bandages, and he said, "Oh, that's a beaut. You know, I got one here." He had his shorts on. "I got this one on the top, and this one, this one, and this one," and he was covered with scars, the old man, you know. Anyway, you asked the question, and you see, and he said, "Now, Sandy, is there anything I can do to help you?"
Banking on his time in London, where he socialised with Freiberg and his wife, Sandy was not above asking his commanding officer to stretch the rules.
"I want your help to stay here with the chaps," you see. And he said, and of course Jack Griffiths, the AD, he didn't help. He said, "That will be the reason why you can't go." So I said, which was a touch of brilliance, I said, "Well, the general stayed on in the First War, and look at his scars." And so anyway, the general thought about it, and he said for the top doctor he had was a brigadier called Kendricks, a hell of a nice guy, and he looked him in the eye and he said, "I want a medical board for this young man."
The medical board was formed. In order to be past fit, Sandy was asked to lift his injured leg with Brigadier Kendricks pressing down on it.
I thought, Christ, I couldn't even lift a bloody baby, you know. His hands were forced, and then suddenly I realised his pressure was going off. And as I lifted it up, there was no pressure at all. So I was able to get it up a bit. And he said, "All right, you'll live, it'll heal."
In the same way he lived his whole life, Lieutenant Sandy Thomas was back to active service, back to his beloved 23rd Battalion, ready for the next adventure.
I think I was still 21, wasn't I? Yeah. I was 21. I mean, I had my 21st birthday in England. I was 21. The start of life.
By the end of the war, aged 25, Colonel Sandy Thomas was New Zealand's youngest ever battalion commander. He finally retired, Major General Sandy Thomas, Commander of Southeast Asian Land Forces. He now lives in the small Queensland town of Bow Desert.
He should have been a pirate back in the old days. I think he'd have done very well.
So anyway, what's next?